If you want to start turning, we're going to the book of Ezekiel. Allow Ezekiel to preach to us this morning. Now, without saying it, we've started working through this book. We're to chapter 5, and that's where we are this morning. I think it's important to remind us of God's love for us. If God had wanted to make everything right in our lives, He would have not given us choice. Choice is what gets us into heartaches. You know, you just watch the cows walk around. They're content with grass, yet they can get really fat on that. They're vegetarians. There's always somebody to make sure they have water, try to make sure that they get doctoring. God didn't give them choice, but He cares for them. He cares for the birds. He cares for all of that, but He put choice in His highest creation, people. And choice is how we get ourselves hurt and damaged away from God. God says, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's choice. If you love me, make the right choice. And the right choice says, I see what you've done for me, God, and I choose to serve you. And we're going to look at Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a married man. He was a priest. As a priest, he was scrupulously clean relative to everything that was contaminating. God called Ezekiel to preach. He was in Babylonian captivity. He was by the river Chebar, and he was observing his people and all the things that had brought them to where they were. Now, 722 BC, Israel went into Assyrian captivity. 606 BC, Judah went into Babylonian captivity. And this is God taking them away from the ability to do what they knew they should do relative to the city of Jerusalem. All of their sacrifices were to be at the city of Jerusalem in the temple. So God removed from them the ability to even imagine that they were getting it right. They knew now they weren't getting it right. Well, He called Ezekiel to preach. Ezekiel is told what he needs to say to the people in vision. And I know I said this before, and that was chapter 4. That every time I study Ezekiel, it reminds me of Jacob Wilson here and handing us a handout. And because in chapter 4, he was told to get a tile. Now, he's got an object lesson here. You can see it. And he's to make a city there on that tile. Now, I don't know if he put dirt on the tile, if he drew on the tile. I just know he got a tile. And he made a city in it, on top of it. And then he was to make outposts around the city. And then he was to get him a frying pan, a skillet or something, and he was to lay down on the ground for 430 days. And that was his defense, to hide behind the skillet as he's going to destroy the city that he just builded. And it was an object lesson to say, Jerusalem is fallen. Now, starting at 4 and running through 24, and I learned something here. is one sermon. One sermon. Jerusalem is fallen. Well, how are you going to preach one sermon that many times? 4 through 24. And the answer is, he tries to couch it differently to preach the same sermon. And what do I learn from that? I learn a lot about preaching. In preaching, you're either informing folk of what they don't know, or you're reminding them of that which they do know. That's what Ezekiel was doing. Why does Tide still run commercials? I mean, they were great 50 years ago. Because there's a new generation with jobs and money coming on the scene every day. That's why preaching has to be teaching, and that's why preaching has to be reminding to those of us that already know it, but have let it slip a little bit, and therefore are being called back to it. That's old Ezekiel's sermon. Jerusalem is fallen. Jerusalem is fallen. Well, that's what he's trying to say and get across. So what's he going to do in chapter 5? I always write an outline when I study, and I call 5 the haircut. Now you can look at it. It's another object lesson of Ezekiel. Look at Ezekiel 5. And thou, son of man, take thee a sharp knife. Yours may say sword. Take thee a barber's razor. Cause it to pass upon thine head and upon thy beard, and take 3 balances to weigh and divide the hair. Well, now, he took a sharp knife or sword. He took a razor. He chopped out of his hair. I'm reminded of about a 3 or 4 year old kid. First time they got hold of the scissors and went after their own hair. But he's got a crowd watching him now. What on earth is the matter with Ezekiel? Do you see what he's doing? He's cutting globs out of his hair. He's using a razor to cut globs out of his beard. What is he doing? And then he goes and gets scales. And he's weighing the hair. And he's trying to get 3 exact portions of the hair. What is the matter with Ezekiel? Look as he goes on. Thou shalt burn with fire a 3rd part in the midst of the city. Now the city was on the tile, chapter 4. You're going to burn a 3rd part of it when the days of the siege are fulfilled. And thou shalt take a 3rd part and smite about it with a knife. He took another 3rd part and he's cutting it. Well, it's already been cut off, and he's cutting at it as he's working there. He's got a crowd watching. Has Ezekiel lost his mind? What's the matter with him? He goes on. And a 3rd part thou shalt scatter in the wind. And he's just throwing it up, that it might float. And I will draw out a sword after them. He's running and hacking at the hair that he threw up in the wind. He's got a big group gathered to watch the crazy prophet. Thou shalt also take thereof a few in number. Now look at that. Because he divided the 3rd part into 3 pieces. So in my Bible, I went 1 to 3, and then I went ABC. And he divided the 3rd part in 3 pieces. Now he was running and hacking at it in the wind. And look what he did with this little piece of that 3rd part. A few in number, and bind them under thy skirts. They were made a part of him. They were to be the survivors of this. I want you to notice we went through 3 parts And then we went into thirds of the third part. And only a third of the third part is going to survive. Yeah, God was fed up with Israel and Judah. He was totally fed up. I'll tell you the reason now. And we'll look at it again and again as we pursue. Because they did not do what He put them there to do. Ooh. God has a purpose for you and me. And it does make a difference whether we do what He put us here to do. And it's not important for me to look at others about me and say, well, they're doing as badly as I am. That ought to make the point to me. I was put here for a purpose, and I need to fulfill my purpose and not spend all my time looking at others and their lack of fulfillment of their purpose. That's what he's talking about. And he goes on there. I like verse 3. Only a third of the last third would be cared for. 4, then take of them again and cast them into the midst of the fire, and burn them in the fire, for thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel. The third of number 3 is going to be burned. God punishing His people. 1 Peter 4:17 says, for if judgment is to begin at the house of God, what shall be the end of them that know not God? Judgment beginning at the house of God. I look on. Thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. Here is the reason for the severe judgment. That's my outline. The reason for the severe judgment. This is Jerusalem. God said, this isn't Sodom. This isn't Gomorrah. This is Jerusalem. And look how we've acted. We are allegedly the children of God. And yet we're not doing and seeing that which we should do and see. That's what he's talking about in 4. 5, thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I've set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are round about her. That's an indictment. Jerusalem, Israel, I set you in the middle that you could exemplify what my religion is all about. And you have not exemplified what my lifestyle, my religion is all about. Make an application that's personal. You claim to belong to me. Does everything about the way you conduct yourself say, I belong to God? If not, God is indicting you. And you say you're Jerusalem. You say you're Christians. I hear God say, change your name or change your conduct. Don't tell folk you're Christians. If you're not going to change your conduct to exemplify what I want, what you're to be in reflecting me. And that's why God says right there, you're in the middle of the nations, the midst of the nations and countries that are round about thee. And she hath changed my judgments. See, they failed to influence. You changed. You've become more like the nations than like what I want you to be in the middle of the nations that they might see. You've changed what you ought to be. And she hath changed my judgments into wickedness more than the nation. He said, you're worse than the people I won't put you there to teach to. People put you there to exemplify what you ought to be to. You're more than the nations, and my statutes more than the countries that are round about her. For they have refused my judgments. Do we know any part of our lifestyle where we have refused God's opinion of what our lives ought to look like? It does make a difference how you and I live. It does make a difference. Yeah, I know salvation is by grace through faith. But don't say that and keep saying that and not realize that it does make a difference how we live. Our conduct counts. Oh. They have refused my judgments and my statutes. They have not walked in them. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because you multiplied more than the nations that are round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have kept my judgments, neither have done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about you. You refuse to fulfill the destiny that I had for you. Why has God put us here? Why has God put us here? That's a good question. It's a question we need to ask. And then why has God put me here is the second we ask. But the first is, why has God put us here? And the idea that God has a purpose for us begs us to look for that purpose. They had refused to fulfill their destiny. We learn so much by studying the Old Testament. So what happened to them? They went off into captivity. They could not get to Jerusalem, that they might offer sacrifices that would be even holy. They were contaminated from the get-go. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I, even I, am against thee. You know, there's a few people that you kind of hate to be on the opposite team that you're on. But Jehovah is on the top of that list. And what he said to him is, I, even I, am against thee. You see, to whom much is given, much is expected. And God had given them much, and what had they done? They'd put in every idol that all the heathen had, thinking that, boy, I don't want to skip any idol because that may be the one I shouldn't have offended. That's how they got that attitude from the world they live in. They didn't get that attitude from God. God placed them there and He wanted to be their king. God's world is here and He wants to be my king. He will not tolerate being second to anyone or anything. I've got to see. Captivity says, I will not accept being second. Oh. All right, Lord, I'm hearing you. He said, I, even I, verse 8, am against thee, and will execute judgments in the midst of thee in the sight of the nations. Now that's an interesting statement right there. Because God said, I'm going to punish you right in front of all the ungodly. Why? Because your sin was done in front of the ungodly. I put you there to exemplify, and you didn't exemplify. I didn't know this passage existed, but I used to tell my children, and with 3 boys, they could figure a way to get into everything. I'm going to discipline you at the place where you do what was wrong. I know you'd rather not be disciplined in front of other people, but if that's the case, then don't do what's wrong in front of other people. Oh, okay, that was a pretty serious influencer toward not getting it wrong in front of a group. Oh, okay. I don't know, I might have learned that from my parents. One of my parents would take me to school on the first day of every year, and they would explain to whoever the powers were that if this kid needs a whipping, we expect you to give it to him. And I expect you to get word home, because if he gets a whipping here, he'll get another one when he gets home. I guarantee you that had a lot of influence on my conduct. I knew where all of the factors stood. I see now here that God says, I'm going to get you, Israel, Judah, I'm going to get you in the presence of the people you were supposed to influence for good and have not influenced for good. Oh, and he did. You know, they went off into captivity. And I will do in thee that which I have not done. That's interesting. And whereunto I will not do any more the like, because of thine abominations. That's a proverbial expression, and that would be fulfilled in 586 with the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. But you know what? Jesus used that same statement in Matthew 24:21 with the destruction of Jerusalem after it had been rebuilt by Titus in AD 70. Jesus used the same statement. He goes on, therefore the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers, and I will execute judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into the winds. Wherefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, surely because thou hast defiled my sanctuary with all thy detestable things, and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have pity. I get the feeling Jehovah's filled up. He's totally sick of their conduct. Brethren, the Bible and the Old Testament speak so eloquently. Oh, the New Testament does also. But when we see what he did to them in having them whipped and moved to foreign lands, you know, the United States, except for the Civil War, has never been in a struggle where it took place on their own land. That's been a blessing that it never took place on our own land. But Jehovah is above all. And wisdom declares, if we care that he's happy with us, that we work hard to make all right choices and to exemplify him with everything that we are. We don't allow ourselves the latitude of being angry. Well, I talk like that only when I was mad. What you did was so stupid that it brought out another side of me. It's a shame that the other side's in you. It's a shame that the other side hasn't been removed from you. We've got to see that how we live makes a difference. Okay. He goes on. Wherefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, surely because thou hast defiled my sanctuary, verse 11, with all thy detestable things and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any pity. And then, I feel like verse 12 kind of explains the symbols that we've already looked at about the thirds of the hair. A third part of these shall die with the pestilence. Pestilence is a plague. Boy, this is an interesting verse because it shows how our God can work. You know, we got a measles plague right now, huh? How did all that happen? Well, that happened, somebody in a land where they didn't inoculate came over, and you've got a bunch of people that won't inoculate either, and therefore God can send a plague that we ain't even heard of yet. And that's God working, always working, to try to say, hey, look where you are. Look where you need to be. Only thing that really counts, is your relationship with me. But he goes on. A third part of thee shall die with the pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. So a third part's going to die in the city, and a third part shall fall with the sword round about thee. A third part's going to die out of the city. And I will scatter a third part into all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them, slain by the pursuers as they fled. But then he goes on to his description. Thus shall mine anger be accomplished. There's people who think God never gets mad. You got to think that not reading this. Don't read Ezekiel 5 if you think God didn't get mad. And if you think God does get mad, then you need to ask yourself, what makes him mad? Well, I know what makes him happy, keeping his commandments. What makes him mad? Why would the antithesis of that not make sense? Not keeping his commandments. Not fulfilling my purpose here on earth. Oh, okay. I want us to think through when you see an angry God. I said, well, that's Old Testament. No. Hebrews says, for our God is a consuming fire. That's New Testament. And when I learned that as New Testament, that's in chapter 12 and verse 29. And then in chapter 10 and verse 31, he says it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Okay, God gets mad. But you know, parenting's a good school there. Sometimes we got mad when we shouldn't have, didn't we? And sometimes we didn't get mad when we should have gotten mad, didn't we? And sometimes we were too severe, and sometimes we were not severe enough, weren't we? You know the thing about God's anger? It's always just. It's always just. And I will never, ever be over-disciplined by God or under-disciplined by God. Because my God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I will, with the discipline of God, get exactly what I had coming to me. I won't get away with anything. It's not a matter of fooling those that are about you. It's a matter of fooling him or recognize he will not be fooled, and therefore making the choice to try to emulate the conduct that he wants. I look at that and I see the anger of God. 13, mine anger shall be accomplished, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them, and I will be comforted. I like that. Not only does God get angry, but God doesn't stay angry forever. I'm going to get you, and then I'm comforted. And they shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken. I underline that. Spoken it in my zeal, when I have accomplished my fury in them. Moreover, I will make thee waste, and a reproach among the nations that are round about thee, in the sight of all that pass by. Underline that again. I believe we preached that point. In the sight of all that pass by. So it shall be a reproach and a taunt. Look at that. A reproach and a taunt. An instruction and an astonishment unto the nations that are round about thee. It's going to amaze them and instruct them when I punish you. It's going to amaze them and instruct them when I punish you. Ooh. In anger and in fury and in furious rebukes, I, the Lord, have spoken it. And then he lists 4 sore judgments, is what it's referred to. We don't have the time to go read it, but you can read more about it if you want to look in the 14th chapter, 12 through 23. But he says, when I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine. That's one of God's 4 sore judgments, famine. Which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you. Who sent it to destroy us? And I will increase the famine upon you, and will break your staff of bread. So will I send upon you famine and evil beasts. God can send animals to isolatedly deal with us. And they shall bereave thee, and pestilence, that's your plagues, and blood shall pass through thee. And I will bring the sword upon thee. War, I the Lord have spoken it. God tells us that I can punish you in measure. I don't have to destroy your country. I can punish you in measure. If you deliberately refuse to exemplify your purpose, I can take care of you and not mess with anyone around you. Oh, the loss of you is going to influence people around you. But I wasn't working at them. I was working at you. That's what God did. That's what God did with Israel and Judah. And God said the things written aforetime were written for your learning, Romans 15:4, that you through patience and comfort of the Scripture might have hope. How can I have hope? I hear what God has said, and therefore I change me that I might have hope. I love old Ezekiel's sermon. I like watching him go through and how he alters it ever so slightly from 4 to 5. A couple of 3 months, we'll see what he's got to say in 6. But that's Ezekiel preaching to us, who is by the river Chebar, in captivity himself, still trying to get his people to change, that we might go home. That's going to be the last section of the book. He's going to give comfort to them because they had changed enough that they were going to be allowed to go home. Have I changed enough that I will be allowed to go home? Home, sweet home. If we can be of any service to you, let us know as together we stand and sing.